Good evening. My name is Robin Muir. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Kitsap, I want to welcome you tonight to the 26th Legislative District Virtual Forum. Tonight's forum is co-sponsored by Kitsap Regional Library and the Bremerton Kitsap Access Television, who will be broadcasting a recording of this forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that neither supports nor opposes political parties or candidates. The League does take positions on issues at the local, state, and national level only after careful study and consensus by our members. As a membership organization, we depend on our members to organize and run events such as this. We invite and encourage both women and men to become members and help us work on our basic belief that our form of government depends upon the informed and active participation of its citizens. Joining us this evening are the candidates for the 26th legislative district seats, Jesse Young and Carrie Hesch for position 1, and Joy Stanford and Michelle Caldier as position number 2. Rules for this evening's forum are as follows. All candidates will be given 1.5 minutes to make an opening statement. Following the opening remarks, I will ask questions that have been submitted by the public. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question. At the end of the forum, each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to make a closing statement. Please keep an eye on our digital timer. If time expires before you finish speaking, please finish your sentence and then yield the floor. Each of you has our thanks and gratitude for stepping up and running for elected office. Please be respectful of each other, refrain from personal attacks, and address your remarks to the moderator or audience. So let's get started. Each candidate will now have 1.5 minutes to make their opening remarks. We'll use alphabetical order by position number to determine our initial rotation. And then as we do our questions, we will rotate who goes first. For our opening statements, Ms. Hesch, you may begin.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for having this forum. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the constituents in the 26th. My name is Carrie Hesch, and I'm a proud resident of the 26th, where I've lived in both Long Branch on the Key Peninsula and in Gig Harbor. I've raised my 2 beautiful daughters here who I'm very proud of, my eldest who's serving as a community police officer, and my youngest who's a special needs vulnerable adult just about to enter the workforce as soon as we have some more movement through the COVID pandemic. I currently work for the Washington State Department of Corrections, the Washington Corrections Center for Women, as a professional who focuses on wellness approaches to rehabilitation and educational programs. I'm also a very proud Teamsters 117 shop steward for our DOC staff, and I'll always advocate for our working families, most of who are on the front lines. I've earned a master's in infrastructure planning and management from the University of Washington with a research focus on preparing for and adapting our communities to the rigors of climate change. And my bachelor's is in health ed and communications. I'm an elected director for the Key Peninsula Community Services Senior Center and Food Bank, where we support our most vulnerable populations. And as a public safety professional, I'm running to give every person in the 26 a responsible, equitable voice at the table in Olympia. And I'm running to respectfully work side by side with all of our legislators in planning and adapting to our new normal under the COVID pandemic. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Thank you, League of Women Voters. You know, as many of you probably know, I'm State Representative Jesse Young, position 1, the senior delegate from the district. I've been serving you since I've been unanimously appointed by Republicans and Democrats in 2014. You might also know, if you've seen me over the years, that a lot of my service has been inspired by a lot of my upbringing, especially in Tacoma, where I grew up homeless and had to go through a lot of poverty. I was blessed to be able to rise up out of that poverty. I graduated as valedictorian in my class, was a Washington State scholar, and was fortunate to be accepted to the University of Notre Dame, where I graduated with a degree in business and technology that I've parlayed into a successful consulting career that really allowed me to rise my family up out of poverty. And it wasn't long after really beginning that career that I moved back to the areas that I grew up in and saw that most everyone that I'd grown up with was still impoverished. And it really inspired in me a desire to want to serve just beyond my own family and taking care of my kids to make sure they don't know poverty. What about my friends? What about my fellow man? And that's why I'm here today to serve you. In my time in office, I have kept a number of promises for you. I serve in leadership. I'm the only representative leadership to serve on 2 budget committees in leadership in the House Republican side. I like to think that I roll up my sleeves and go to work for you, because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that your kids, just like my kids, have every opportunity to succeed in life. And I'm going to continue to try to make sure that they continue to have those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today, and thank you for the League of Women Voters for putting this event on. I'm State Representative Michelle Caldier, proudly serving my 6th year in Olympia, representing the 26th Legislative District. Prior to becoming a legislator, I was a nursing home dentist, a foster mother, and also an affiliate professor at the University of Washington. I came down to Olympia as a citizen advocating on behalf of my nursing home patients, and I learned that one person could make a difference, which inspired me to run for office. As a Republican and a very steep minority in Olympia, I am one of the top Republican legislators with bills passed and amendments accepted, and this is because I have good working relationships in all 4 caucuses, and because of my very hard work ethic. I have an open door policy. I believe in listening to everyone, regardless of where they stand on the political spectrum. I'd be honored to be your representative for another 2 years, and I look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Ms. Stanford.
Hi, I'm Joy Stanford, and I'm running to be your next state representative here in the 26th Legislative District. As a longtime resident of the 26th District, and with my background of service to the community, I understand what is needed right now and what is valued. I am the candidate who's committed to bringing all voices to the table to find solutions and put working families first. I believe the issues and challenges that we need to address as we push through this pandemic have nothing to do with party politics. However, they do have real impact on the quality of our lives. And right now, the voices of children, seniors, and working families is not being represented. I believe by coming together collectively, we can make real progress for everyone. And in addition to addressing all the public health and economic impacts of COVID-19 and the institutionalized racism that exists in our society today, I am committed to improving our public health system, our educational system, and creating safe, affordable housing, and to make sure that our small businesses in our communities can recover and are better prepared for the next crisis in the future. I have the experience, I have the perspective, and I want to make sure that all of this happens for all of us. I look forward to earning your vote and your support.
Thank you. All right, we're going to begin the questions. We'll have 1 minute. Each of you will have 1 minute to answer. We're going to start the order by the order that you appear on the ballot. So we're ready for the first question. What do you see as the greatest challenges and priorities for the 26th district in the coming 2 years? How would you make sure these priorities are addressed? Mr. Young, you get to go first.
Well, the greatest challenges that we have, number one, is we still have health that we need to take care of for everybody and safety, but we also have to get the economy going. And the way that you address both of those is with an economic plan that increases the revenue at the states, so that we don't leave those that are struggling behind, and we're there to provide for them as we've promised and dedicated through public service. Well, the way that you do that is with the plan that I've submitted that was lauded by the Seattle Times, the News Tribune, and that's an economic restart plan that will immediately kickstart the economy so that we don't see a continued deficit in our spending as a result of COVID. And if you see that economy rebound, what happens is our deficit goes down, it shrinks up. It's already been cut in half over 3 months. If we start to increase revenue without having to overburden people with additional taxes, we will actually have more money to spend to make sure we're providing for those that are vulnerable, those on fixed incomes, those who are low income, single parents. We need to be able to provide for those, and you do that with the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier.
Thank you. So the biggest challenges that our state faces right now that affects everybody in our state, not just the people of the 26th district, is turning our state around in light of COVID-19. We have a huge budget deficit that we need to address. I serve on Appropriations Committee. I understand how our budget is made. We need to make sure that the industries that are disproportionately affected, that we are doing everything that we can to turn them around. In addition, we also need to figure out how we're going to educate our students. We have a huge educational gap as it is with our foster youth and individuals with developmental disabilities, and we need to figure out what we can do to make sure that that educational gap doesn't increase. I could go on and on about this, but thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford.
Most importantly, we need to recover from COVID-19. We need to get Main Street back right. That's our small business owners who are suffering right now. We also need to make sure that we are in this COVID-19 pandemic, being able to give access and resources to our families as they're doing online school. That's majorly important, that we are supporting not only the students, but our parents and the administrators and the teachers that are out there trying to do a hard job. Most importantly, we want to make sure that we're not going the austerity way. We are thinking about new revenue, progressive revenue that can help all people, that's equitable. So my main focus is going to be equity, making sure folks have resources and all the supplies that they need, whether that's our frontline workers needing PPEs. It doesn't matter. We want to make sure that we are making sure that everybody is set right after this pandemic is over.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch.
I think it's very important that we continue to follow the data and science so that we can come out of this pandemic as soon as possible. The more of us who are actually doing what we've been asked to do, which is mask up and keep ourselves distant, stay home if necessary, the sooner we're going to be able to move our economy forward. And I'm also very interested in getting people back to work. And some people who've lost their jobs may need to retool, and we provide those opportunities through trades-related apprenticeship coaching, working with our local community colleges and our trades unions to do that. I think that will be very beneficial for folks to have that opportunity to retool if necessary. And also looking at how we prepare our communities in the face of the climate crisis, especially when it comes to wildfire danger. What we've seen this year especially is that an increase in wildfire has been exceptionally dangerous for our communities, and we need to be paying particular attention to our heavily forested areas in the 26th, to include the Key Peninsula, which is in extreme danger from fire because they don't have a good emergency management plan in place for egress.
Thank you. All right, question number 2. Maintaining the infrastructure of our state's roads, bridges, and culverts is critical to safety, quality of life, and economic viability. What projects, especially those in the 26th district, do you support for the coming budget cycle and beyond? Ms. Caldier, you would be first.
Thank you. So there are quite a few things that we have already had in place to help improve our roads. And there were many things that we fought for in the budget, which unfortunately with the transportation budget, the governor vetoed everything that was part of those packages. There are certain things like the Purdy Spit that we need to fix with congestion. The culverts do have to take a priority because they are part of a federal lawsuit. And I will continue to fight for that. One of the things that we did try to do is get clarification as to whether or not the governor is able to just strike out certain parts of our budget in the future. And that came back that he had illegally done that. So hopefully these upcoming years with the transportation budget, we will be able to get something in the package for our district. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford.
I think it's vitally important that we take care of the congestion that we have coming on to the 16, extending carpool lanes. That's going to be important, but we've got to work on the infrastructure first, the infrastructure. And I think the question was around also projects. We haven't seen a whole lot of money come from Olympia into our district around transportation and infrastructure. And so I'm hoping that we can go in there, Carrie and I, and make sure that we are fighting for those dollars that's going to help us be able to fix the Purdy Spit and alleviate that congestion, fix the congestion on Highway 16. Watch has an issue as well, but we can't do that without the dollars. But right now, because of that I-976, a lot of these projects have been put on hold. And so we need to make sure that we can find those dollars, and working with Representative Jake Fye, who heads up the Transportation Committee, is going to be our #1 project to do.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Yeah, well, thank you. This is an important question. I wish I had 5 minutes to tell you. As a leader on transportation that has worked with Representative Fye to not only fix the bridge tolls and keep them from going up, we've also funded a number of infrastructure. I'm surprised that Joy doesn't know that. We've brought millions of dollars into this district, not only in culvert replacements, both in Kitsap at Sedgwick and down on the Key Peninsula for Minter Creek, but we put in the money for the Belfair bypass, which the governor has stalled out, which is the first phase of solving all the infrastructure problems in South Kitsap down into the Key Peninsula, which is the first phase of bringing through a bypass from connecting Highway 3 all the way through to Highway 16, which gives us a bypass of the Gorst infrastructure. These are major, major projects that we have led. Michelle and I have both fought for additional passenger ferry districts into Seattle. We have brought absolutely millions of dollars. If you live in Port Orchard and you've seen the changes to Tremont, more money that we've brought in. We've done it from the ports, through the ferries, and through the critical infrastructures on Highway 16. I'll be bringing more, and so will Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder that if you do disagree with your opponent, that you address that in a civil tone. Number 3, how would you rate our state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic? What additional steps?
I didn't go on that question.
Pardon me? Oh, I am so sorry. I'm sorry. Ms. Hesch, would you please respond to the second question?
Absolutely.
And thank you for keeping me straight.
No problem. So I want to first thank Representative Fye for his endorsement of my campaign. I really appreciate the work that he's been helping me understand what they've been trying to do for the state of Washington. I recognize that the culverts are required to be done by a Supreme Court order. So that was something that was required to be done. What we really need to do is be working with the Department of Commerce and bringing in money to this district to really get to work on the infrastructure. That has not occurred. And everything that I've read in the transportation budget and in the Department of Commerce's website and working with the folks there hasn't been money coming in. There hasn't been grants applied for in order for us to upgrade our infrastructure in this area. And that would be something that I would be working with immediately.
Thank you. All right, the next question. How would you rate our state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic? What additional steps, if any, would you have recommended? And what do you see as the legislature's role in solving the problems related to this pandemic? Ms. Stanford, you are first.
Could you repeat the last part of that question?
I'd be happy to, yes. What additional steps, if any, would you have recommended? And what do you see as the legislature's role in solving the problems related to the pandemic?
Okay, great. Thank you for that question. I think the role is that we should be listening to our health professionals, the data that's coming down. We did not follow instructions like we should have as citizens to keep masks up and keep parties at a minimum, of 5 people. Those rules were not adhered to. So I'm gonna say we initially started out really well. We kept our numbers low. We followed all the rules. But as we went into phase 2, moving into phase 3, we have not. The numbers have gone back up. I think I saw a number today that was like 80 something cases with no deaths today. I think there was 1 death yesterday, 60 something cases yesterday here in Pierce County. I'm just talking about Pierce County. But I think that we have tried to do our best and tried to listen to the science behind how this pandemic started, how it's transmitted. Going further, I think we need to invest in contact tracing, and we need to continue to make sure that as we open up, we are doing it safely for all of our residents here in Washington State.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch.
I think that as a state, we've done very well to try to keep the pandemic at bay as much as possible. When you don't have a playbook, you have to go with the science and the data and do the best you can going forward, and make sure that you're fluid in your decision-making processes. I do feel like at the local level, it just showed that we weren't really prepared from an emergency management standpoint to address the situation. And going forward, it's very important that our local communities have a playbook, so that when we have another situation arise like this, we're ready to go. We have the PPE, we have the equipment, our first responders are prepared. It is everybody's responsibility to follow the guidelines so that we can have a safer and more healthy community for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Thank you. Very important question. Yeah, I think that this response, especially by the governor, has fallen way short. We've had a number of major problems. The first one was his choice not to bring us back into session, where we had over $2.5 billion extra that the legislature could have afforded to put into health provisions for people, and the governor refused to bring us back into session. And then as a result of that, we've had a number of things. He implemented a phased approach, but then just last week that he said was based off of science, but then last week jettisoned the whole thing and stopped doing the phases and just started cherry picking industries to open back up. These are the same industries that he's gutted in terms of unemployment. We've had over almost $1 billion, at least $500 million wasted on unemployment insurance. Both Michelle and I have received thousands of requests from constituents trying to get their unemployment insurance, and the governor has shut the office down and will not respond to them, leaving these people fending for themselves to try to put food on the table, and in a complete debacle with the PPE that went to all major corporations, and none of it really went to local businesses. This was all a major missed opportunity that has hurt a lot of people.
Time. Thank you. Ms. Caldier.
I think originally that we were all working together, and I think originally when this pandemic happened, leaders put their differences aside and we worked together. And I think that the solutions that we were coming up with were bipartisan and were helpful for our state. However, something happened there, and unfortunately, the governor wound up deciding to pick winners and losers. I have some people where I have one gentleman in particular that he wasn't allowed to have his cancer surgery, so he had to have his bladder removed, and he will no longer be able to urinate on his own, but yet women could get abortions this entire time. In addition, we had certain industries where if you were unionized, you could work for construction, but if you were private, you couldn't. We should have gone back to special session. In the meantime, the governor got a pay raise implemented on July 1st, as well as every elected official. That should have stopped. We should have addressed our budget, and we would be in a much better position now. So I'm very disappointed with how it wound up turning out.
Thank you. Next question. What state act? Joy, did you have a question? Did I miss you? No. All right. What state actions do you support to ensure students receive a quality education throughout the pandemic, and what measures do you support to ensure education is fully funded? Ms. Hesch, you are first.
I think it's critical that we make sure that every student has the technology that they need in order to be educated fully, especially under the pandemic where our students are learning from home. Not all of them are able to have laptops, so I think that's important that we find a way to get them that technology. Also, we talk a lot about broadband, but in the interim, we don't have that yet. It's something that's being worked on very proficiently within the legislature. But what we need to do is make sure that the folks who don't have access to internet have the opportunity to have Wi-Fi hotspots. And we need to make sure that we're providing within our district offices a place where these students and their families can call so that they are able to get those Wi-Fi hotspots in order to connect with their educators. I think that it is imperative that we fund special education at 100%. We still are not doing that. That is something that I'm very focused on going forward, and we'll make sure that that legislation is passed.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest things is we need to get our kids back into school. And one of the most unfortunate things that we have right now that Carrie just brought up was that you're not getting the funding that you need. And the reason why we don't have it is because the governor will not call us back into session so that we can release the funds to do it. And that's one of the major missed opportunities. Again, now it's hurting our kids. It's not just a matter of businesses, it's a matter of children. And going forward, I think one of the things we're seeing through COVID is that we must start promoting greater choice for parents and for children to not only pick and choose where they can educate, but actually have options for them. That includes a continued investment in CTE and vote tech options for parents and children going forward, instead of trying to corral them down a predefined path that says you have to go to college, especially when we're so rich in an area with vote tech jobs as a result of being so close to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard and all the ancillary businesses. Those are continued focuses that you're going to continue to see me focus on. And at the end of the day, it all boils down, we must give parents and children choices. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier?
You know, I received an email from one of our educators the other day, and she said it perfectly. She said, you know, about 15% of our kids, you could probably put them in a closet and give them a book and they could teach themselves. And then unfortunately, the rest of the kids, a lot of them are not engaged right now. And many of our foster youth and our individuals with developmental disabilities, they're falling through the cracks worse than what they were before. I have continually fought for fully funding special education. I was able to get in the budget increased ratios for special education. This is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I'm a foster mother myself. I was in foster care as a child, and I know that my education was my key out of poverty. And right now, we need to fix our current educational system. Remote learning is not working for many of our students. And we need to go back to session and figure out how to resolve this.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford?
Yes, I just recently had a community conversation around education and was talking to some parents out of the Peninsula School District. And it seems that teachers are doing their very best and doing an outstanding job at teaching remotely and keeping our kids engaged. Now, not every kid's going to be, especially those younger ones, but they are doing their best. Here in Peninsula School District, kindergarten and first grade are in person, but I'd like to see special education come back. We need those kids to get back into the classroom. So that's something that I would definitely champion, and also making sure that we have all the resources available to parents and to students. We need to make sure we're satisfying those basic needs of each student and each family. On top of the fact, I truly believe to develop a comprehensive career program, a training program for that ties in academics is going to be very fruitful for our older generation of kids in school.
Thank you. All right, this question is quite long, so just as a warning, I guess. In Kitsap County, the Harrison Medical Center has been taken over by Catholic Health Initiatives, CHI Franciscan, and renamed St. Michael Medical Center. What is your position on the merger of local secular community hospitals and the Catholic hospital systems, which forbid or severely restrict many reproductive and end-of-life healthcare services, such as contraception, vasectomies, fertility treatments, hormone treatments, tubal ligations, death with dignity, and LGBTQ+ healthcare, all of which are legal in this state? What are your thoughts on how this secular to religious platform will ultimately affect medical choices made by patients and their physicians? Mr. Young.
Well, yeah, well, I think there are two answers. There's a broader answer and there's a very specific answer. And Representative Caldier, from her position on the Healthcare Committee, which I don't serve on, really took a leadership role on some of the particulars of that bill to make sure that our constituents were protected. But from a higher level, I'll tell you, this is why we need to focus at the state level from a budgeting perspective on allowing regional flexibility. What you have is a delimitation of options for people to go to, and they're reliant upon a scenario that forces them into one hospital or another instead of being able to go in person to other doctors, because the way in which the state, and mostly out of King County and Pierce County, the way that they put provisos or restrictions on the way that the money that we allocate is spent, it can only be spent in certain ways that give advantages to very high traffic urban areas. And so what it does is it limits the amount of money that we can offer to our counties, so that our counties in rural areas have that ability to go provide that healthcare. And I've been championing the ability to release those provisos so that the money can then be available to our rural providers, which ultimately gives people more options. That's how you solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier?
Thank you. This is something that Representative Sherry Appleton, Representative Senators Christine Rolfes, and I all worked on. Basically, what happened in our Kitsap County area is that CHI Franciscan used their leverage. They starved out local doctors and then wound up acquiring each one of these medical practices. And we had physicians who came and blew the whistle to us that there were 5 specialties where you had to have only CHI Franciscan providers in our entire region. So we contacted Bob Ferguson, our Attorney General. He did the first ever class action lawsuit, which did get settled. In addition, once they were able to get the monopoly in the region, CHI Franciscan increased the cost by double digits and refusing to allow people to have their care performed in an ambulatory surgical center, which is far less costly, and require them to be in a hospital setting where they get a facility fee. I'm more than happy to talk longer about this, but I know my time is up. But this is something I'm very passionate about. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford?
Yes, I'm always going to stand next to folks who want choice. Choice is what makes this world go round. I believe that folks should have a choice on whether when you're talking about reproductive rights, they should have a choice. We should have a choice where we're going for our care. We should have a choice on how we end make our end of life decisions. So in listening, I was on a phone call listening to workers from St. Michael's and all that they were struggling with as far as making sure that PPEs were available to them at their workplace. It wasn't. But after the phone call, all of a sudden, it magically appeared that PPEs were available. So I think we have a situation where representatives, once elected, need to look into this. I think I'm going to say, right now it's a monopoly, and I'd like to make sure that people keep having a choice.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch?
I'd like to say first that hospitals or other organizations who don't support their staff ultimately end up facing the unions that support those staff. And I think that in this situation, those unions are going to make sure that the staff have what they need as far as that protective gear. And they're also going to be pushing for the opportunity for more options. You can only push a system to be so segregated so long before people stand up and say this isn't right. And doctors who take an oath have to provide services. They cannot say we're not going to care for you. It is required by law. They will do no harm, and they will provide those medical services to those folks.
Thank you. Next question. To balance the budget, what cuts and/or new sources of revenue would you consider? Would you be in favor of reducing some of the corporate tax breaks? Ms. Caldier, you are first.
Thank you. Right now, one of the things that we should have done is gone back to special session, and there were a bunch of new programs that were implemented on July 1st. We should have paused a lot of these new programs and salary increases, such as the governor's salary increase and for all of the elected officials' salary increases. I don't think that those should have happened at all. In addition, that there are certain industries that were disproportionately affected. So our tech industry is actually doing pretty well. Amazon's doing pretty well. Microsoft is doing really well. However, our hospitality industry, aerospace, those industries are really struggling right now. Now is not the time to increase taxes for them. We need to do everything we can to preserve that industry sector and keep them moving forward. So, but I do think that a lot of the new programs should be put on pause until we have the revenue to cover them. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford?
While in the short term, we will have to make some difficult decisions, our long-term view should consider not only how do we recover from the economic impacts of COVID, but how do we rebuild a system that creates more equitable outcomes and ensures that we are meeting all the basic needs for the folks here in Washington. Progressive revenue can be raised through the elimination of obsolete tax deductions, exemptions, and then making sure that that top 1% in our state, whether it's a corporation or a person, is paying their fair share. There's not one single solution here. I just want to be clear on that. We know we're going to have to go in January and really dig deep, but we also know we need to protect our social service nets that people have, because we do not want to continue to burden the voters who continue to pay more in taxes and have lower incomes. That's my job, and that's where I stand.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch.
I just want to say first that we need to make sure that we don't go to an all cuts budget. In the past, when we've done that, it's just in the Great Recession, when they did that, it just caused educational funding issues, mental health crisis to increase, childcare crisis to increase, the homelessness crisis to increase. And economists across the spectrum have said that this is not the way we need to go. We need to be focusing on other issues like people who have excessive compensation, being levied taxes like on big corporations who are paying CEOs $1 million in excess. We need to be looking at why those folks aren't being, levied some funding. And we tax the entire proceed of a home, but yet we're not looking at the proceeds of stock sales. And that's an excellent way that we could be bringing in more revenue to help preserve our systems in place for our most vulnerable. And I think that also this would help folks in the small businesses who may need some extra help through that type of funding.
Thank you. And Mr. Young.
Well, I agree with Carrie on the all cuts budget being opposed to that. It's unfortunate that it's the Democrat Party that passed that type of all cuts budget in the past. And make no mistake, they have controlled the budget for the past 30 years in Washington state, and we've been fighting to remove. Most people are shocked to find that over 70% of the tax deductions that our opponents are saying right now that we should get rid of have been sponsored by the Democrat Party. We think that there needs to be a greater focus in our tax code to provide for our small businesses. If we do that, then we make sure that local jobs are available for local people who live there. And with a COVID happening right now that has shut down and killed a bunch of businesses, we need to go in the opposite direction. Now, let me be clear. The real discussion here is something that we agree upon. We want more revenue brought into the state so that we have the money to provide for those that need. The greater way to produce that revenue that the economy has shown is to grow the economy. And if you grow the economy by helping our small businesses get open, by not overburdening them with taxes, we produce more tax revenue as a result, and then our budgets grow and we can help those in need. That's the way that I will advocate. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question. Do you believe that the Black Lives Matter movement has raised legitimate issues about law and justice fairness in our state? What legislation, if any, would you support to bring about greater fairness and equity for all citizens? Ms. Stanford, you're first.
That's interesting. Repeat, please, for me. I'm sorry.
I'd be happy to. Do you believe that the Black Lives Matter movement has raised legitimate issues about law and justice fairness in our state? What legislation, if any, would you support to bring about greater fairness and equity for all citizens?
Great, thank you for that question. Yes, I do think that they have brought about issues around law and justice. Black and brown men and women are disproportionately killed in our country, in our state, right here in my own county. And we needed to bring those issues to the forefront. And I've been at Black Lives Matter rallies. They've been safe, they've been nonviolent and non-destructive. And I do believe that we need to pass some legislation or get with our cities and counties and talk about how we can redistribute the funds that go to our law enforcement agencies so that we are building up the safety net programs and community programs that would lessen the interactions that folks would have with our law enforcement.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch?
I do believe the Black Lives Matter movement has brought increased awareness of the systemic racism in our society, our state, and our country. And I think that looking at new legislation that focus on how we can look at how we write legislation through an equity lens and look at legislation that's been written before through that lens to see who is most impacted by that legislation and what we need to do to make sure that legislation is providing equity for everybody. I think that this is something that hasn't occurred and needs to start occurring as we move forward in order to protect all citizens and give everybody the opportunity to live a life that's healthy and has opportunity for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Yeah, I think you see a major separation here in policy, at least between me and my opponent. But I do not support a defund police model whatsoever. And any type of notion that wants to throw police under the bus by saying that they're somehow inherently racist is wrong and is racist in and of itself. I feel as though our first responders and our police are being, they've told me that, and this is why I have the endorsement of the Walk Cops organization, the statewide council of police and sheriffs in this state, because they feel as though they're being thrown under the bus. You're talking about people that are putting their lives on the line every single day. And then you'll have candidates that just come up and say that, yeah, they're systemically racist. They're inherently racist, whether they know it or not. How are they supposed to go risk their lives for us and protect our communities when we so vilify them that way? Yes, are there issues that we can raise and try to fix? Yes, but you start from a standpoint of honor and then you try to work together. You don't divide up front and then vilify someone on the other side of the aisle by saying a cop that puts his life on the line is somehow doing it because he's racist. I don't support that, and I don't support defunding police. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier?
Thank you. So I think that the peaceful protesters for the Black Lives Matter movement have shown that there are many situations that we can improve on with law enforcement, but I also believe that the rioters that we have had in our state have also shown how much we really need our law enforcement. One of the things that I think that would be helpful to have in our state is for the body cams, for mandatory body cams. And that is something that would allow increased transparency. I think that we need to come together. In the past, that legislation was stalled because there was a question as to whether or not the public should have access to people's private homes and people's most private moments, whether they should have access to people who have passed away and murdered. And I think that the legislature needs to come together and resolve that. And I think that when there's transparency shown, that we can shed light on a lot of these situations, and I think it will stop a lot of the problems. Thank you.
Thank you. In the same topic area, here's our next question. What are your views on law enforcement? Are changes needed to eradicate bias and uphold principles of fairness and equal rights? Do you support reorganizing state and local funding of law enforcement? Should law enforcement training on managing nonviolent crimes be expanded and updated? Ms. Hesch, you're first.
As the mother of a law enforcement professional and a public safety professional myself, I am exceptionally unhappy with my opponent continually attacking me on statements of defund the police, which I have never said. What we are doing in law enforcement is we are reimagining law enforcement and criminal justice in this country. And I work in that realm. Every day, I work with criminal justice professionals and I support law enforcement as a family person from a law enforcement background. And as we reimagine how we can best support our communities as guardians and how we can support our law enforcement professionals and providing the mental health professionals who will work alongside them, that is the approach that we are taking, and that is the approach that I support. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Well, I appreciate the question. The first thing I'll note is that I never lie and I never misspeak, period. And Carrie Hesch, on a previous Kitsap County, or excuse me, League of Women Voters debate in the primary, literally called all cops paramilitary and combative in nature, and then said she wants to get rid of the Department of Corrections outright. She has supported defund police. That is a fact, and it's on the record. And to change her stance now shows you that that's the kind of legislator she's going to be. She's going to watch polling results come back, and then she'll modulate based off of polling instead of standing on conviction and being transparent with you and telling you how she really feels. There's a reason why the police organizations in this state have endorsed me, because I will stand up regardless of popular opinion. I think people want a voice of reason in the legislature, and the voice of reason is to stand up for our first responders. With regard to the specific question you asked, I'm working on a bill right now that will focus more heavily on behavioral health and making sure that our officers are constantly taken care of on that aspect. So a normal officer doesn't become a stressed officer, which becomes an at-risk officer. And I'm gonna continue to work on that for you.
Thank you. Just a reminder again to please address the issues and not the individual. Ms. Caldier.
Thank you. I do think that there needs to be some reforms in place with our law enforcement. I think that one of the things that I've tried to work on is when we have somebody who is mentally ill right now, if that person goes into any hospital within our state, the behavioral health organization, or the BHO, that takes care of the mentally ill person, they get pinged. So and one of the things that I've been trying to work on is making that so that any time that there is a phone call of someone who's mentally ill, or any time that someone goes into the jail system who's mentally ill anywhere in our state, that mental health agency can then be implemented to help with that person. In King County, part of the contract has in there that if someone goes into the jail system, that they need to follow that person. And that is one of the things that I'm going to continue to advocate for, so that we can fix some of those problems in our state. Thank you.
Is it my turn? Okay, I didn't hear you. You're on mute, Robin. I didn't hear you. That's okay. I didn't hear you. Thank you. You know, basic human rights of individuals needs to be respected by all institutions. I've made it an important topic, you know, criminal justice reform, talking to police officers, talking to our chiefs of police to make sure I know where they stand. We've never said, and I'm going to say we, Carrie and I've never heard her say defund the police. We've always said, can we reallocate those funds so that we have a community that is united together, and have the law enforcement agencies understand that you're using different techniques and systems when you're dealing with people that don't have wealth and who are of a different race. So there is some sort of systematic racism going on here, and that's what we need to fix. And we can't do that if we don't start talking like they have in Bremerton, getting together, talking to law enforcement with community members, and doing that throughout the state of Washington so that we can understand what each other's talking about, what each other's thinking. That's the important, that's where those systematic changes can start from.
Thank you. Switching topics. Affordable housing is an issue in the 26th district. What approaches or legislation would you propose or support to increase the availability of housing for low income and moderate income residents? Mr. Young?
Great question. Well, the simple answer, not easy, but simple, is to allow for regional flexibility in our Growth Management Act provisions. And what we have right now is a Growth Management Act that was catered to more of the urban areas, and it's affecting the flexibility, not only in terms of how we roll out money from the state down to the counties, but also how the counties are able to build things, whether it's low-income housing, whether it's just housing in general, or even where we place our schools. And as a result, what you've seen is a shrinking of the supply that is available to people. And as you start to see a shrinking of supply that's available to people, you see prices go up as a necessity. And you also then force people in the urban areas where prices are higher to begin with. We need to unleash the ability of our builders to go out and build more supply so people can get affordable housing. And as COVID is showing, we have the ability, we have an opportunity right now to allow for greater at-home working opportunities. So let's open up some of the rural areas, build more supply out there that's affordable, and provide for our middle income and low income people in a way that they can truly get access to. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier?
Thank you. I was appointed to the Legislative Executive Poverty Reduction Workforce, and that is one of the things that we have looked at. One of the problems that we have is that our state is not keeping up with the number of people who are moving into our state with housing. So we are building more houses, however, they are not keeping up with the demand. So we do need to address our Growth Management Act. We need to make it so that cities are able to adequately annex certain parts of the county so that we can have more room to grow. In the meantime, we also need to look at the current capacity that we have. And one of the bills that I put forward was with the shared housing program and allowing them to have to competitively compete for grants, because the cost of getting someone into a home is very minimal. I was very honored that my opponent was able to come and testify on my bill, because it is a true solution and something that I'm hopeful that I can continue to work with her on. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford?
Yes, we're just not building for working families. We're building $400,000 and $500,000 and $600,000 homes, and our working families cannot afford that. Multi-income level housing is what is needed. And I believe that's where we could start. We can also start with shared housing. It's been a part of my story. My kid is 32. I think I went into that shared housing situation with my roommate when I was a single mom, and he was 3, and he's 32 now. So shared housing's been around for a very long time. It's just kind of come to the Pacific Northwest in the last 30 years. But I think that's another option for people who are having housing instability, is matching up families, matching up seniors, matching up veterans to share housing. That's just another option. Every time we come up with, tiny homes and things like that, people come out of the woodwork and say, not in my backyard. We need to come together with neighbors and friends and neighborhoods and let them understand we're creating housing, not just for folks who are homeless, but for folks who are having housing instability.
Thank you. And Ms. Hesch?
Homelessness and housing crisis is a local, county, and federal issue. And $135 million was passed in our last cycle to assist local communities with addressing this in crisis. And we need to make sure that we're keeping affordable housing projects in place and continue to build more affordable housing moving forward. And we do that by looking at some of these areas that are zoned for dense residential housing and making sure that we're building those types of housing in areas where people can get to the needed grocery stores, medical, within walking distance, because we don't have a lot of opportunity for transportation, mass transportation here. The Growth Management Act is meant to be a fluid document, and it does require updating from time to time. That's necessary with any legislation. We always tend to look at how we need to make sure that things are working for our communities in the here and now. And I think by doing that and addressing our regressive tax system, we'll be able to fully fund that housing trust fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. How should the legislature create a transparent, accessible, and representative process in redistricting when the 2020 census is completed? Ms. Caldier.
Well, so the way that the redistricting works is you have a couple members from the Democrat side as well as a couple members from the Republican side, and they're the ones who wind up doing the redistricting. So that's not something that, it's not a process that everybody unfortunately gets to participate in. I am incredibly concerned with how that is going to look because it is highly political, and the 26th district is a swing district, as is the 28th district, as is the 35th district. So you have 3 districts that are all swing districts. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, and we're going to see this play out on a national level, that at the end of the day, you have 2 parties who are fighting over power. You know, how our constituents will be served and what that looks like, unfortunately, will be determined by the 2 political parties.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford?
Yeah, that was my understanding, was that we all didn't get a say. Although if we're elected, I would hope that we could come together and not put politics in it, maybe, to make sure that it's a fair and transparent, but also making sure that our constituents know what we're doing. But my understanding was it's not something that everybody gets to have a say in. Also, if one party has majority, we just need to make sure that we are, again, I think, addressing this in a fair and unbiased way.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch?
I think that it would be wonderful when we look at redistricting if we look at it from a completely new lens, and that would be through what's called a geographic information system, which is utilized often by our universities that provide equity mapping for areas, so that we make sure that folks in areas are getting all of the needed representation, they're getting the needed health care, they're getting the required dollars in order to provide the services within the area. And it's very equitable when we use that type of lens. And it would be something that I would want to be looking at as a legislator going forward, and how we change the way we're actually doing this to make it an equitable process that provides the needed services and funding equitably in every area. I don't think it's something that we're doing currently, and it should be more about the people and less about the politics.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Well, actually, this is a complicated area that not a lot of legislators focus on, but actually what Carrie said actually is in place right now. And I think the rest of the panel would be happy to know that Washington State is lauded for the way it does its redistricting, because it takes the politics out of it. I'll agree that there could be more transparency, but the way Washington State does it is it doesn't let the majority party just rule, which is what you see in most other states. And as a result, you get party shifting that tries to gerrymander in their favor. The way Washington State does it is each caucus, and so there are 2 Republican caucuses, 2 Democrat caucuses, appoint a member each. And so you have a 4-person panel that ultimately has to come together and vote for a majority decision. So they have to compromise. And it takes all of the political players out of it so that they can do it. And then each of those individual members can utilize the types of programs that Carrie just described. And then they also have mandated times where they have to submit their plans to the public and also go for review. And you'll see that all happen going forward next year. Each of the caucuses in January will appoint their people, and then you'll see the schedules come out. But Washington State is actually lauded for taking the politics out of it. It's actually a pretty good system because it stops the gerrymandering altogether.
Thank you. Next question. What actions can the state take to prevent and or reduce poverty and homelessness? Ms. Stanford, you are first.
You know, I talk to providers every Friday morning. Our Tacoma Pierce County Housing and Homeless Coalition is a great group of providers who has come together every Friday morning to talk about this. Kitsap Housing and Homeless Coalition does the same thing once a month. And then I've started the Gig Harbor Key Peninsula Homeless Housing and Homeless Coalition here. And, you know, one of the things we are always talking about is making sure that we are finding those folks who are homeless, making sure they have all the basic needs that they could get, and then trying to make sure that they know what their options are. A lot of times it's just education. And if we're going to curb the homeless situation, we need to step up our game, our mental health care and access for folks. That's another way, and then folks that are coming out of incarceration, because we know that they're more likely to be homeless. But if you're homeless, you're going to be you may or may not be having a mental health crisis. And so there's a lot of work. There's a lot of interconnections here that needs to be at play. And mental health, housing, homelessness, all are interconnected, and we need to start working on all those things all together at the same time.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch.
As a person who works in criminal justice, it's very important when we're releasing folks that they have the opportunity to have housing first. We know that providing a place for them to live is the springboard by which they're able to put their lives back together in order to work or study, reconnect with family. And so I think it's very important, just like what we do in the criminal justice system, that we're also doing for our folks who are homeless. We're providing them that springboard from where they can start their life again. It's amazing what a house, like I worked with the Lehigh Low Income Housing Institute in Seattle, providing charity with the organizations. I have 26 charity organizations I work with through the prisons, and we provide quilts and hygiene kits to low income folks. And these folks who just have a home they can go to and lock the door so that they can be safe and start their life again is hugely important and something that we need to be focusing on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Well, I think it starts with being bipartisan. And one of the things that people are always interested to find out is, in over 2 decades, I'm the first legislator that has ever crossed out of his own party ranks and sided with the Democrats to provide them the 50th vote that they needed to pass a bill. And that had to do with low-income housing, and specifically Section 8 provisions. I've been lauded for my continued commitment to homelessness because I know what it's like. I grew up in that type of impoverishment. So it starts there, and being able to not just vote the way your party wants to, but being able to actually go and listen to the other side of the aisle and vote with them on matters like this are extremely important. The second thing I would say is we need to re-envision the way that we do our capital budget allocations. There are too many nonprofits out there that don't spend a majority of their money actually getting it down to the actual people that need to receive it. And you see a lot of that money being wasted on admin. And that's an area that we definitely need to clean up, because I'm not trying to give money for someone to have a 6-figure salary and say that they're helping a homeless person when they're only giving 10% of their budget to them. And that's why I'm proud to serve on the Harbor Hope Center. I was there with Joy when we opened a brand new home. That agency gives over 90% of the money. Over 90% of the money goes straight into the hands of low income. And that's how we need to re-envision the way capital money is spent. Thank you.
Done. Thank you. Ms. Caldier.
Thank you. So this is an area that I am incredibly passionate about. I'm very honored that the Democrat Speaker of the House appointed me to 3 critical work groups. One is the poverty reduction work group. The other one is the children's mental health work group. And the last one is Project Education Impact. And all 3 of those really address some of the gaps that we have in our system. Originally, we had been working on some really great solutions. Unfortunately, with COVID, what we've learned is that a lot of the families who were struggling to meet their day-to-day needs, they are now falling through the cracks. And so we've had to restructure things. One of the biggest areas that we're going to be coming together on is preserving what the infrastructure we currently have. Because right now people are falling through the cracks. We need to get people who are able to work back to work, because a lot of people are now unemployed and now are on services. So this is something I'm very focused on, and I will continue to work in a bipartisan manner on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. What are ways the legislature can promote measures to address the crisis of climate change? Ms. Hesch, you're first.
One of the ways we promote that is by looking at all of the available science, and that climate crisis is something that we're living in now, and providing opportunities for local communities to prepare for what that means. We do a lot of work around how we're going to prevent climate change, but what we're really not doing is providing opportunities to prepare for being in that climate crisis. Preparing and protecting our water systems, especially in the 26, because we're dependent on the aquifers here. So we're particularly at risk for seawater inundation or saltwater inundation. And when that occurs, we don't have fresh water to drink, and we don't have water to water our food, our crops. Anybody who's out here involved in agriculture knows how important that is. We also need to be making sure that we are preparing our homes when it comes to fire danger, and working with our local first responders, our firefighters, who I'm happy to say I've received the endorsement of every local fire department in this district, because I've worked with them on this issue, and I know how important it is to prepare and protect our communities with impending wildfires that will increasingly get worse in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
You know, I think a lot of people are surprised to know that I've been the bipartisan leader on this with the Democrat caucus. The Pollution Liability Insurance Agency was instantiated and funded out of a bill that I passed with Representative Peterson that really has served as the blueprint for the largest carbon reduction across the West Coast of the United States over the past 6 years. It was so effective that we've expanded it multiple times, and even Governor Inslee used it as one of the keystone tenets of his environmental plan when he was running for president. And what that bill has done, not only is it reduced carbon, it's building out the infrastructure so that we can adopt greater electrical vehicle usage without having to raise taxes or give favors to corporations. At the same time, it's also doing a massive amount of work to protect our local groundwater. And it's doing that in a way that partners with private businesses, especially gas station owners that run very risky tanks in the ground, that we need to make sure that we're constantly shepherding to make sure that those never have a problem and potentially leak into our groundwater. Areas like that in bipartisanship is where I'll continue to lead. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier?
One of the most frustrating things with Olympia is sometimes you get different lobbying groups that have a lot of money that pay money to different caucuses, and they kind of set the agenda. And that's kind of the situation with the climate change groups. One of the biggest problems that we face is the raw sewage that's being dumped into our Puget Sound, but that is not a priority of these lobbying groups. It's not on their list. And one of the things that we saw in 2017 was that 250 million gallons of raw sewage were dumped into the Puget Sound. And do you know what the fine for King County was? It was only $361,000. So that's a little over $1, about $1.50 for 1,000 gallons of raw sewage. And I was very grateful that Suquamish Tribe finally sued in July of this year because they were fed up with the amount of raw sewage that's been dumped, and that will be my priority moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford?
Yes, this is one of the biggest threats to our communities right now and our livelihoods. And it's going to require us not only at the state level, but the national level, as well as the local level, to address this. I believe that we need to get to that net zero carbon emission economy by 2050. I think that's been the goal that's been set out by Washington state law. I definitely oppose the expansion of fossil fuel and non-clean resources. I want to advocate for more resources to wind and solar operations, but at the same time, if we're phasing out those non-clean jobs, then we need to make sure that we're phasing those folks in to not disproportionately displace them or make them struggle even more. Make sure that they have job training in those clean energy jobs. And that's important to me, that those unions know that we stand with them and that we will be there with them to make sure that they still have jobs available to them.
Thank you. Next question. What are your thoughts on the issue of forest management for the state, or more specifically, the 26th district? What are the best ways to protect and restore water, forests, rivers, and shorelines? In case of a fire, are evacuation routes in the 26th district adequate? Mr. Young, you go first.
Yeah, I appreciate this question. One of the things that I've been attacked on is that my opponent says that I voted against some funding for this, but let me be very clear. I've voted far more times for funding for fires. One of the things you see in the three bills that are typically cited by her are last minute bills that the Democrats will throw forward and try to take the money out of our rainy day fund that we have put aside to make sure that we had money for health and wellness for people during a COVID solution. So to say that the way that you want to budget proactively to solve our forest fires and our forest management system is to take money at the last second out of a rainy day fund, instead of doing your job when you go down to Olympia and prioritizing it out of the budget up front so that we make sure that we manage our forest correctly. that we take out all the underbrush that is serving as kindling for these forest fires that have produced more carbon into the output over the past 8 years than any carbon plan that Governor Inslee's ever put out is really disingenuous. The truth is we need to prioritize it at the beginning of the budget, not try to throw money at it at the last second in a feckless attempt that doesn't solve the problem. And if these solutions that were purported by my opponent on this issue were effective, why did the fires keep going? We should have addressed it up front in the budget, and that's where I've been voting to fund forest protection. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier.
Thank you. Yes, that has been the problem for many, many years. Our forests have not been adequately managed, and we did not thin out the forest like we should have. I will say that, and then also in addition, the communication that we've had for the firefighters that have been on the ground floor has been poor. It's old equipment, and there's poor communication, and one of the forest fires that happened a couple of years ago where there was a couple lives lost, it was because of the poor communication. So one of the things that we have done is put more investments into there, but it's quite honestly, it's not enough. And for years and years of mismanagement, this is something that will take time to fix. And I will say that the new Lands Commissioner, Hillary Franz, is doing a much better job than her predecessor. Her predecessor, quite honestly, was part of the problem as to why we're in the situation we're in. But it will take time to fix. And unfortunately, we're in the situation we're in. So,
Thank you. Ms. Stanford.
Yes, I believe that our lands management commissioner is doing an exceptional job with the resources and the equipment that she has. When she comes out to speak to us, we already know, she's said it over and over again, she's dealing with not enough resources and old equipment. That's one of the things I think that it's going to be up to us as elected officials to go down there and fight for, and to make sure that we are giving her all the resources and equipment that's going to help those workers do the job right, to thin out the forest so that we don't have loss of forestry. This is one of our commodities here in the Pacific Northwest, is our land. And we need to make sure that we are taking care of that. But that needs to come from some sort of funding type. And that's where we start getting into the progressive tax that needs to come forth so that we can divvy this money up and give it to the resources that truly, truly need it. But I want to say, I believe she is doing an excellent job with what resources she has.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch.
I am going to reiterate how much I appreciate Hillary Franz's work on protecting our forests and working side by side with our first responders and our wildland firefighters. Part of forest management is not removing the underbrush. I want to make it clear that that's called riparian zones, and it's important that we protect those because those help keep our forests healthy and also protect our water systems. So what we do in land management is we don't remove all of the natural brush and habitat. What we do is we remove trees that may be leading to more and more forests, specifically those trees that are damaged or diseased. And as far as routes for emergency egress and ingress in fires, we do need to be working on that in this district. There isn't a real comprehensive emergency management plan in place when I've talked to our firefighters, and I think that's something that I would be working on immediately as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So we got everybody correct. Next question. There has been speculation that a drastic cut in ferry service may be necessary, even to the point of eliminating the Southworth Vashon Fauntleroy ferry runs altogether. Will you fight for continued ferry service if you are elected? Ms. Caldier.
yes, thank you. I live close to the Southworth Ferry Terminal, and I'm a frequent rider of that ferry, and I know how important that is to our community. I do not support cuts for that. I would, however, support re-looking at what the current ridership is and maybe modifying some of the scheduling, but I do not support the cutting it at all, and I will do everything I can to fight for that. But there has been decreased ridership in light of COVID, and unfortunately, we do not have we will have to address the current ferry system, but I will absolutely fight for our ferries, and I will fight for our community, and I do not support cutting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford.
I took that ferry for years and years and years on a van pool, and then as a single rider because I was a sales consultant and I needed my car. So I'm going to champion that ferry, what I call highway. I will stand tough on that one. These folks don't want to take their car. And let me tell you, it takes 3 hours sometimes to get to Seattle just from Gig Harbor. Can't imagine starting in Port Orchard, but just from Gig Harbor, it sometimes took me 3 hours to get to Seattle and 3 hours home. That's 6 hours in a car. That's not quality of life. And so to be able to have that option of taking a ferry and reducing my carbon footprint on top of reducing my commute time is essential. And I would stand with those folks and not support cuts to that. But can we improve? We can always process improve, but also think that the stakeholders need to be at the table with us when we're talking about any type of cuts to the ferry service there in Port Arthur.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch?
The ferry system is very unique to our state. And it's one of our icons, one of our iconic infrastructure pieces, and something that people really value. And for years it's been struggling. It's something that we have not been paying as much attention to as we need to. And I really think that we need to be looking at how we can provide a public partnership in order to revitalize this important infrastructure in our state. The funding is just not available to revamp, to preserve our current ferries. We need to rebuild them, and we need to be providing the opportunity for more jobs. And we do that by offering the opportunity to build ferries here. That's something that we have been overlooking. We're looking at the lowest bidder, but I think we need to be looking at ways in which we can provide job opportunities to build those ferries here in Washington State.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but that answer is completely wrong and infactual. The biggest problem that we've had in the state is that we're not allowed to go out of state for bids. There is one provider only that is building ferries right now, and they happen to be an extremely large donor to the Democrat Party. I have been fighting constantly with the leadership, the Democrat leadership on the Transportation Committee over the past few years on our contract renegotiations. They have, since I've been in office, jumped up the cost of building ferries from down in the $60 million range all the way up to the $130, $150 million range per ferry. We need to allow for out-of-state bidding to come in. And make no mistake, that does not. We have proven it through studies that are available online to you, that if you allow out-of-state bidders coming in, they're still going to subcontract with all the local builders here in the district. All the jobs will stay. We just need to break the monopoly. And unfortunately, the Democrat caucus is refusing to do so because of all of the major contributions that are coming to them from this one provider. I will continue to fight and lead on this issue. And no, I would not support the ferry pathway, the Fauntleroy ferry from being taken away. And the way to fix it is to reduce our costs so we can afford more ferries. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, last question. Although public utility districts, or PUDs, are allowed to provide broadband telecommunications, actual installation of optical fiber has been limited. In large swaths of Kitsap and Pierce County, citizens cannot access or afford the reliable high-speed internet that is needed to run their personal and professional lives. Remote learning has certainly illuminated this problem. Do you support making PUD broadband a priority? Ms. Stanford, you are first on this one.
Yes, I believe this should be a utility because it's important to have our students have the access that they need. We've got kids out on the KP that don't have access to be able to do remote learning. So we're leaving, to me, it's not equitable. folks who live further out. That's their choice to live further out, but it's also should be an option for them to be able to have broadband services. And then a lot of folks can't afford it. So having an option where we can give them high-speed internet for a low price. I know there's one available now. I believe I directed a family to the school district and they helped them get some sort of broadband access at either low or no charge for them was available. And so we need to make sure that we are in talks with these utility companies, with these cable companies, make sure nobody has a monopoly on just one area, because I know that's hard too. We've only got a couple of cable service providers, but making sure we're in negotiations with them around all of these issues so that our families are served.
Thank you. Ms. Hesch?
Yes, I'm absolutely in favor of broadband becoming a public utility. It should be widely available and affordable for everybody locally. Allowing the public governments, including counties, to work in this public-private partnership is what is needed in order to get that broadband in and moving quicker. I know that Representative Hansen in the 23rd has written some legislation around this. It's very promising. I feel like it's going to pass, and I'm very happy that that has occurred. And so I absolutely support this. And as a person who works with folks in infrastructure, building those relationships is key. It is very important for us as legislators to be able to build relationships across the aisle and build relationships within our community so that we can provide better opportunities for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Yeah, well, this is a technical answer, but it's very important as well. So the first thing I would note is that the original legislation that opened up and started to break the back or lay the foundation to break the back of the monopolies of the big cable providers was not only did I vote for it, but I helped craft it in committee. The unfortunate thing was that the Democrat caucus was mostly opposed to it, but we had a strong Democrat leader of that committee. After he passed that bill, they drummed him out and replaced him with a different Democrat. And Rep. Morris is gone now because he stood up to the monopoly that the cable providers are basically purchasing, and these major corporations are purchasing through their donations to the Democrat Party. Now, it's not just PUDs, and I don't want to expand it just to PUDs. I want to also expand it to local co-ops, because for those of people in this district that live in the Pierce County side, we're not governed by a PUD. We're governed by Penn Light. And so we need to expand it also for local co-ops. And that's how we're going to get that last mile finished. And that's how we break the back. And I have a proven record of standing up to these corporations and voting on behalf of citizens to get this done. And I will continue to lead that fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier.
Thank you. I don't know if you've ever had a problem with your cable company or not, but their customer service isn't that great. And the reason why is because it kind of doesn't have to be, because they've got a monopoly on you. And that has been one of the challenges that we've had in our state, is trying to break that up. One of the things that we did recently in Kitsap County was Senator Rolfes took the lead on that, and I worked with her so that we could at least carve out for Kitsap County an exception to allow the PUDs to do that extra mile and provide more creative financing for families so that they can get broadband out to the community. So that was something that I helped work on. And I supported. I want to implement that so that there is a little bit of competition across our state, and I will continue to work on that. I think that with remote learning, we've seen how integral and important that having access to the internet is, and we need to make sure that families have that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we've come to that part of the forum where we each get to make a closing remark. You will have 1.5 minutes to do so, and we're just going to continue in the rotation that we have been using for the questions. So Ms. Hesch, you are first. You have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much to the League of Women Voters for having us here tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to answer the questions. I want to note that we have never in our lifetimes had such a confluence of so many events in our communities motivating us to positive change to improve our public health and our public safety going forward. And it's imperative that our communities in this district have a responsible, qualified leader at the table in Olympia to work to recover our economy and our public health. We're in the midst of the biggest economic and health crisis of our lifetime, and you're going to need a representative in Olympia who can deliver for our district, a representative who can build respectful relationships in the legislature, in local government, and at the federal level, which I have been doing for years. It is imperative that when you're looking at us in this forum, it's a job interview. It's the greatest job interview that you can have trying to get a job in the state of Washington. And so I think it's imperative that before you mark that ballot, that you go and you look at the voting record of my opponent. And you make sure that you understand what he is standing for before you mark that ballot. Because I'm going to be the representative in Olympia who is going to support and represent all of you. And I'm going to make sure that I pass legislation in each cycle. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Well, thank you all. And I agree with Carrie. I believe that every one of you should look at my voting record, and I think you'll be very impressed with what we've done. Since I've been in office, not only did I single-handedly solve the Tacoma Narrows Bridge financing issue, which every previous legislator, including Congressman Kilmer and Representative Sequist, said could not be solved, it could not be refinanced. We stopped the tolls from going up that if we had not, would be over $10 a toll right now. We solved that. I did that from the minority position. I did that with the help of Democrats because I know how to get into the budget and dig into it on your behalf. And ultimately, that's one of the things you pay me to go down there and do. And I have a unique skill set in the world of IT, technology, finance, and I lend that to you. In addition, you have seen, and Representative Caldier gets some credit for this, but since Caldier and I came into office, we sat down very early together and said, this district doesn't get its fair share. And you have seen the largest uptake in capital budget money brought back to this district that surpasses anything that the former Democrat coalitions ever brought to this district. We have moved this district into the top 5 districts in the state in terms of capital budget allocation, and we've done that from the minority. You know why? Because we both know how to negotiate. We negotiate extremely effectively for this district. I have if you go to washingtonvotes.org, you can check a box in there to see how many times a candidate votes against the majority of their own party, and you will see that I have one of the strongest and highest bipartisan voting records in state history because I work with Democrats and I do it effectively across the aisle because I keep my word, I roll up my sleeves, and I work hard. I will do it for you. Please vote for Jesse Young this November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Caldier?
Thank you. I really appreciate the League of Women Voters for putting this event on and for putting all of the events on that you guys have had over the years. I know that last year you held a forum with Representative Sherry Appleton and I to speak about civility in politics, and I think that that is very important. One of the things that we're seeing on a national level, especially now in 2020, is a lot of strife with politics, and it doesn't need to be that way. I think it's something that you need to be continuing to elect leaders that can put their differences aside and work together. And it's okay to disagree with people, but at the same time, I think it's important to be respectful. And that's something that I've always done. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is that last year, last campaign, as well as this campaign with my opponent, I was always very positive, and I led a very positive campaign. And I am a little disappointed that I know that there's going to be a lot of negativity coming forward, but I hope that the good people of the 26th district can see through that negativity as they have in the past and continue to elect leaders that are positive and are willing to work across the aisle to get things done. So I'd be honored to serve another term, and I'd be honored to have your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Stanford?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and to all the sponsors for tonight's event. Now is the time for us to have bold, courageous, and equitable representation. Now is the time for us to have representation that actually represents the people of our community, not special interests. Now is the time to restore trust, integrity, and civility back to our election process. Representation that understands what the middle class and poor families' challenges are, like rationing healthcare due to high deductibles and copays, not just on healthcare, but also on prescription drugs. Representation that understands that veterans and seniors on a fixed income or the working families need a safe, affordable place to live. Representation that does not bow down to special interests, but goes above and beyond to make policy that helps people. Representation that doesn't flip-flop according to what's popular, but does what is right when it's not popular. I hope to earn your vote and your support and to become your next state representative here in the 26th Legislative District. Vote Joyce Stanford on November 3rd.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. Once again, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. A well-informed electorate is critical to our democracy, and events such as this are one way that we can achieve that goal. Election Day is November 3rd. Ballots were mailed, I believe, today, and if not, I think it's by the end of the week, and need to be returned to a ballot box or postmarked by November 3rd. Information on candidates and issues can be accessed at vote411.org or in your voter pamphlet, which you should receive in the mail, but it is also accessible online. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Kitsap, I would like to encourage everyone to vote. And thank you again. Good evening.